The woman who called his wheelchair pathetic had no idea she was insulting the man who had quietly been paying for her son's life-saving heart surgery for the past 18 months. The antiseptic smell of Children's Memorial Hospital filled the air as Marcus Williams maneuvered his custom wheelchair through the automatic doors of the cardiac surgery wing. At 45 years old, Marcus had been navigating the world on wheels for 23 years, ever since an industrial accident had severed his spinal cord and changed his life forever. What hadn't changed was his determination to make a difference in the world. Marcus wore a simple navy polo shirt and khaki pants, his appearance deliberately understated. His wheelchair, while clearly expensive and technologically advanced, was matte black, without any flashy details that might draw attention. To most people passing by, he looked like just another visitor to the hospital. Perhaps a patient or family member dealing with his own medical challenges. They had no idea they were looking at one of the most successful medical device innovators in the country. Marcus Williams was the founder and CEO of Adaptive Medical Solutions, a company he had built from his hospital bed during his own recovery. His patents for wheelchair technology, prosthetic devices, and accessibility equipment had revolutionized mobility for millions of people worldwide. His net worth had reached $840 million, making him one of the wealthiest disabled entrepreneurs in America. More importantly, he had quietly become one of the largest anonymous donors to pediatric medical programs across the nation. For the past 5 years, Marcus had made it his mission to ensure that no child would be denied life-saving medical care due to their family's financial circumstances. Through a complex network of foundations and trusts, he had funded over 300 pediatric surgeries, always anonymously, always without seeking recognition or credit. Today's visit to Children's Memorial was part of his monthly routine. Marcus preferred to see firsthand how his donations were being used, to meet the children whose lives he was helping to save, and to ensure that the hospital's promises of excellent care were being kept. The cardiac surgery waiting room was a place Marcus knew well, though he had never officially introduced himself to the families who spent their most frightening hours in these chairs. He had learned to observe quietly, to listen to conversations that revealed the financial stress that accompanied medical crises, and to identify families who needed help but were too proud to ask for it. As Marcus entered the waiting area, he immediately noticed the tension that filled the space like a thick fog. Near the large windows overlooking the city, a woman in her early 30s sat hunched over a stack of papers, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. Even from across the room, Marcus could see that her hands were shaking as she tried to write something on what appeared to be financial documents. This was Linda Martinez, though Marcus didn't know her name yet. What he could see was a mother in crisis, surrounded by the paperwork that accompanied childhood medical emergencies. Linda's 8-year-old son, David, had been born with a complex congenital heart defect that required multiple surgeries throughout his childhood. The family's insurance had covered the basic procedures, but David now needed a specialized surgical intervention that cost $450,000, money that Linda, a single mother working as a nurse's aide, simply didn't have. Marcus had been quietly funding David's care for the past year and a half, ever since he had learned about the boy's case through his network of medical contacts. Every payment had been made through his foundation, with strict instructions that the family should never know the source of their assistance. As far as Linda knew, David's ongoing care was being covered by a hospital charitable program that had selected her son based on medical need and financial hardship. Marcus positioned his wheelchair in a corner where he could observe without intruding, pulling out his tablet to review the latest reports from his various charitable programs. He had developed a system over the years, appearing to work on business matters, while actually monitoring the families his foundations were helping. The peaceful atmosphere of his observation was shattered by a commotion near the reception desk. "This is absolutely unacceptable," a sharp voice cut through the quiet of the waiting room. "I've been waiting for 25 minutes, and my appointment was supposed to start 15 minutes ago." The voice belonged to Patricia Hawthorne, a woman in her late 40s whose expensive designer clothing and perfectly styled blonde hair suggested someone accustomed to having her demands met immediately. She stood at the reception desk, her posture radiating the particular kind of entitlement that came from a lifetime of privilege. Behind the desk, a young Hispanic receptionist named Sophia was trying her best to explain the situation with professional calm. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I understand your frustration," Sophia said patiently. "Dr. Chen is running behind schedule because he had an emergency surgery this morning. We're doing our best to minimize the delays." "I don't care about his excuses," Patricia snapped, her voice rising loud enough that every family in the waiting room could hear. "I have important appointments after this. I can't sit around all day waiting for people to do their jobs properly." Marcus watched the interaction with growing concern. He had witnessed enough scenes like this to recognize the pattern, someone using their perceived status to bully staff members who had no power to fight back. Sophia maintained her professional demeanor despite the verbal assault. "I can reschedule your appointment if you prefer, Mrs. Hawthorne." The next available slot would be reschedule. Patricia's voice reached a new pitch of indignation. "Do you have any idea how difficult it was to arrange my schedule for today? I shouldn't have to reschedule because your doctor can't manage his time properly." The confrontation was beginning to affect other families in the waiting room. Marcus noticed Linda Martinez looking up from her paperwork with obvious distress, and several other parents were shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Patricia continued her tirade, seemingly oblivious to the impact her behavior was having on others. This is exactly the problem with hospitals these days. No accountability, no respect for patients' time, no understanding of what quality service actually means. Marcus felt his jaw tighten as he watched Sophia struggle to maintain her composure under the verbal assault. The young woman was clearly doing her best in a difficult situation, but Patricia seemed determined to make her the target of frustrations that had nothing to do with the receptionist's performance. The situation escalated when Patricia's phone rang loudly, disrupting what little peace remained in the waiting area. "Hello?" Patricia answered, without lowering her voice or stepping away from the reception desk. "Yes, I'm still stuck at this children's hospital. So they can't seem to manage a simple appointment schedule." She continued her phone conversation at full volume, treating the waiting room like her personal office while families around her were trying to cope with their children's medical crises. "The level of service here is just pathetic," Patricia said into her phone, her eyes scanning the room with obvious disdain. "The staff is incompetent, the facilities are outdated, and frankly, I'm beginning to question whether this is even the right place for Emma's procedure." Marcus realized that Patricia was here for her own daughter's medical care, which made her behavior even more puzzling. How could someone whose child needed medical attention show such callous disregard for other families in the same situation? The answer came when Patricia's conversation took a more revealing turn. "Of course, Emma's surgery will be covered completely," she said loudly into her phone. "Jonathan's insurance through the law firm covers everything premium. We're not like these other families who have to worry about money." The words hit the waiting room like a slap. Marcus saw Linda Martinez flinch as if she had been physically struck, her hands clutching the financial papers she had been struggling with. Patricia continued her thoughtless commentary. "I just want to get this procedure done so we can move on with our lives. Emma needs to get back to her violin lessons and tennis coaching. We can't let this medical inconvenience disrupt her development schedule." Marcus felt something cold and hard settling in his chest as he listened to Patricia dismiss her daughter's surgery as a mere inconvenience while other families in the room were facing financial ruin to save their children's lives. But Patricia wasn't finished. As she ended her phone call, she turned her attention back to Sophia at the reception desk, apparently deciding that her 25-minute wait justified an even more aggressive approach. "Listen," Patricia said, leaning across the reception desk in a way that invaded Sophia's personal space. "I want to speak to your supervisor. This level of service is completely unacceptable, and I'm going to make sure the hospital administration knows how poorly this department is being managed." Sophia's professional composure finally showed signs of strain. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I've already explained that Dr. Chen had an emergency." "I don't want to hear any more excuses," Patricia interrupted. "What I want is action. What I want is competent service. What I want is for people to do their jobs properly instead of making excuses." It was at that moment that Marcus decided he couldn't remain a silent observer any longer. He began moving his wheelchair toward the reception desk, intending to politely intervene and perhaps diffuse the situation with calm words and a suggestion that everyone needed to show patience during difficult times. He had made it halfway across the waiting room when Patricia noticed his approach. "Great," she said loudly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Now we have to deal with this too." Marcus slowed his wheelchair, confused by her comment. Patricia turned to face him directly, her expression suggesting she viewed his presence as another personal inconvenience. "Excuse me," she said in a tone that was anything but polite. "Could you please move your wheelchair somewhere else? You're blocking the area around the reception desk." Marcus looked around, realizing he was nowhere near blocking anything. The waiting room was spacious, and his position offered plenty of room for people to move freely. "I'm sorry," Marcus said gently. "I don't think I'm blocking anything, but I'd be happy to adjust my position if needed." Patricia's response revealed the true nature of her character. "Look," she said, her voice taking on the particular tone reserved for people she considered inferior, "I'm already dealing with incompetent staff and delays that are disrupting my entire day. The last thing I need is to navigate around your pathetic wheelchair situation while I'm trying to resolve this problem." The word pathetic hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had heard variations of this insult countless times over the past 23 years. People who saw his wheelchair before they saw him, who assumed that his disability made him less capable, less intelligent, less worthy of basic respect. But hearing it in a children's hospital, in front of families who were already struggling with their own medical challenges, felt like a particular kind of cruelty. The waiting room had gone completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every family turned to watch the confrontation, and even Sophia behind the reception desk stood frozen in shock at what she had just witnessed. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of the world slowing down around him, the way it always did when he encountered this level of casual cruelty. He could respond with anger. He could reveal his identity and watch Patricia's face change when she realized she had just insulted one of the hospital's largest donors. He could use his power and influence to ensure that she faced consequences for her behavior. Instead, Marcus chose silence. He simply looked at Patricia for a long moment, then quietly moved his wheelchair to a position near the windows, his face showing no emotion, despite the pain her words had caused. Patricia seemed satisfied that she had dealt with what she perceived as an obstruction, and turned her attention back to Sophia. "Now, as I was saying about speaking to your supervisor." But Marcus wasn't listening to Patricia's continued complaints anymore. He was thinking about the 8-year-old boy whose surgery Patricia's insurance wouldn't cover, whose life hung in the balance while his mother struggled with paperwork she couldn't afford to complete. He was thinking about David Martinez, and about the irony that Patricia had no idea she had just called pathetic the man who was saving her son's life. As Marcus reached for his phone to make a call that would change everything, he noticed Linda Martinez watching him with an expression of sympathy and shared understanding. She had heard Patricia's cruel words, and her face showed the kind of empathy that could only come from someone who had faced her own struggles with dignity. Marcus smiled at Linda gently, then dialed a number that would connect him directly to the hospital's chief administrator. It was time for Patricia Hawthorne to learn that pathetic was not a word that applied to the man who held her son's future in his hands. The silence that followed Patricia's cruel words seemed to echo through the waiting room, long after she had turned her attention back to berating Sophia at the reception desk. Marcus sat in his wheelchair near the windows, his phone in his hand, but he wasn't making the call he had intended. Instead, he was remembering. 23 years ago, Marcus Williams had been a different man entirely. At 22, he had been a construction foreman working on a high-rise project in downtown Detroit, known for his incredible work ethic and his ability to motivate crews to achieve the impossible. He had been engaged to his college sweetheart, Teresa, and they had been planning a wedding for the following spring. Marcus had also been walking. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in October. A crane operator, later found to be under the influence of alcohol, lost control of a steel beam that was being positioned on the 42nd floor. Marcus had seen the beam falling and had pushed 2 younger workers out of the way, saving their lives but unable to save himself from the crushing impact that severed his spinal cord and changed everything he thought he knew about his future. The months that followed had been the darkest period of Marcus's life. The physical pain was manageable compared to the emotional devastation of learning that he would never walk again. Teresa, unable to cope with the reality of loving someone with a disability, had quietly ended their engagement, while Marcus was still in intensive care. But it was during those long months of recovery that Marcus had discovered something extraordinary about himself. While lying in his hospital bed, frustrated by the primitive wheelchair technology available to him, Marcus had begun sketching designs for better mobility devices. His background in construction and engineering, combined with his newfound understanding of disability needs, had given him a unique perspective on adaptive technology. His first innovation had been a simple modification to his own wheelchair, a gear system that made it easier to navigate curbs and uneven surfaces. The modification had worked so well that other patients in the rehabilitation center had asked him to modify their chairs as well. Within a year, Marcus had filed his first patent. Within 5 years, he had built a company that revolutionized mobility technology. Within 15 years, he had become one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the adaptive equipment industry. But success hadn't eliminated the pain of encounters like the one he was experiencing now. Marcus looked across the waiting room at Linda Martinez, who was still struggling with her paperwork. Her son David was scheduled for surgery in 3 days, surgery that would repair a complex heart defect and give the boy a chance at a normal childhood. The procedure was cutting-edge, requiring specialists who commanded premium fees, and it was being performed by Dr. Chen, the same surgeon Patricia was complaining about. Linda had no idea that every aspect of her son's care, the surgery, the hospital stay, the follow-up treatments, even the family's temporary housing near the hospital, was being covered by the Marcus Williams Foundation for Pediatric Excellence. Marcus had learned about David's case 18 months ago through Dr. Sarah Kim, his primary liaison for identifying children who needed help. David's condition was exactly the kind of case that motivated Marcus to use his wealth for something meaningful. A child whose life could be completely transformed with the right medical intervention if only his family could afford it. The foundation had been Marcus's way of turning his own trauma into something positive. Every child he helped represented a victory over the despair he had felt during his own darkest moments. Every successful surgery proved that devastating circumstances could be transformed into opportunities to save lives. If this story is touching your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Patricia's voice rose again from the reception desk, pulling Marcus back to the present moment. "I want to be absolutely clear," she was saying to Sophia, "that I expect compensation for this delay. My time is valuable, and this incompetence has cost me money." Marcus watched Sophia's face as the young woman tried to maintain her professional composure. He recognized the expression. It was the same look he had seen on the faces of nurses and orderlies during his own long hospitalization. People who were trying to do their jobs while being treated as less than human by patients and families who viewed them as servants. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Sophia said carefully, "I understand you're frustrated, but the delay was due to a medical emergency." "I don't care about your excuses," Patricia interrupted. "What I care about is results. What I care about is being treated with the respect that someone of my position deserves." Marcus felt his phone buzzing with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Dr. Sarah Kim, his foundation liaison. "Marcus," Dr. Kim's voice was urgent when he answered. "I'm glad I caught you. Are you at Children's Memorial today?" "I am," Marcus replied quietly, mindful of the families around him. "Is everything all right?" "There's a situation with the Martinez family. Linda Martinez just called my office in tears. She's saying that her son's surgery might have to be cancelled." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. "What? Why? The foundation has covered all the costs." "That's what I told her, but she's saying something about the family being asked to leave the hospital due to behavioral issues. She's convinced that someone has complained about their presence here and that it's affecting David's treatment." Marcus looked across the waiting room at Linda, who was now on her phone speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Her body language suggested distress and fear. "Dr. Kim," Marcus said, "I'm going to call you back in a few minutes. I think I know what might be happening here." He ended the call and wheeled his chair closer to Linda, arriving just as she was finishing her own phone conversation. "Excuse me," Marcus said gently. "I couldn't help but notice you seem upset. Is everything okay?" Linda looked up at him with eyes that were red from crying. "I'm sorry, I don't usually... It's just been a really difficult day." "Would it help to talk about it?" Marcus asked. "Sometimes it's easier to share problems with a stranger." Linda glanced around the waiting room, then back at Marcus. Something in his quiet demeanor seemed to give her permission to speak. "My son David is supposed to have heart surgery in 3 days," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a complicated procedure, very expensive, but we've been blessed with this charitable program that's covering the costs." Marcus nodded encouragingly, not revealing that he knew exactly which charitable program she was referring to. "But just now, someone from hospital administration called me," Linda continued. "They said there had been complaints about my family's behavior in the waiting areas, and that if there were any more incidents, David's surgery might be postponed pending a review of our case." Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest. "Did they say what kind of behavior they were concerned about?" "That's just it. I have no idea what they're talking about. David and I have been nothing but polite to everyone here. We follow all the rules, we're quiet, we don't cause any problems." Linda's voice broke slightly. "I'm terrified that somehow I've done something wrong and it's going to cost David his chance at getting better." Marcus looked across the waiting room at Patricia, who was still loudly berating Sophia at the reception desk. The pieces were falling into place in his mind, and what he was realizing made him sick. "Linda," Marcus said carefully, "have you had any interactions with that woman at the reception desk today?" Linda followed his gaze to Patricia. "No, I've been avoiding that area because she seems so angry, but..." Linda paused, thinking. "Actually, when she was on her phone earlier, talking about insurance and premium coverage, she looked right at me when she said something about these other families who have to worry about money. It made me feel ashamed." Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. Patricia's loud comments about families who had to worry about money, her complaints about the level of service at the hospital, her demands to speak with supervisors about various perceived problems. It was entirely possible that Patricia had made complaints about the hospital's charitable patients, families like Linda's, being allowed to use the same facilities as privately insured patients, like her daughter Emma. "Linda," Marcus said, "I want you to know that you and David have every right to be here. You deserve the same quality of care and respect as any other family." "Thank you," Linda said, wiping her eyes. "It's just so scary when your child's life depends on these treatments and you feel like you're walking on eggshells every moment." Marcus was about to respond when Patricia's voice rose to a new level of indignation. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she was shouting at Sophia. "I specifically told you that I didn't want to wait in the same area as charity cases. Emma shouldn't have to be exposed to people who can't afford proper medical care." The words hit the waiting room like a bomb. Every family present, including Linda, clearly understood that Patricia was talking about them. Linda's face went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. Is that what the complaint was about?" Marcus watched as the cruel reality of the situation became clear. Patricia hadn't just insulted him, she had been systematically complaining about the presence of families who were receiving charitable care, trying to have them segregated or removed from areas she considered reserved for paying customers. It was a level of cruelty that went beyond personal insults into active harm against vulnerable families. "Sophia," Patricia continued, apparently oblivious to the impact of her words, "I want to speak to someone in charge immediately. I want to know why this hospital allows charity patients to use the same facilities as families like mine, who are actually paying for premium care." Marcus looked at Linda's devastated face, then at the other families in the waiting room who were now clearly uncomfortable and self-conscious about their presence in the space. He looked at his phone, where Dr. Sarah Kim's number was still displayed from their recent call. And then Marcus Williams made a decision that would change everything for everyone in that waiting room. He didn't call Dr. Kim back. Instead, he dialed a different number, one that connected him directly to the office of Jonathan Hawthorne, Patricia's husband and one of the city's most prominent attorneys. It was time for Patricia to learn that some people's pathetic situations were more complicated than they appeared. And it was time for the Martinez family to discover that their anonymous benefactor had been sitting just a few feet away, listening to every cruel word that had been spoken about them. The phone rang twice before Jonathan Hawthorne's secretary answered. "Hawthorne, Mitchell and Associates, this is Jennifer speaking." "Jennifer, this is Marcus Williams. I need to speak with Jonathan immediately. It's regarding his wife Patricia and a situation at Children's Memorial Hospital." There was a brief pause. Marcus had dealt with Jonathan professionally several times over the years. The attorney had handled some patent disputes for adaptive medical solutions, and Jennifer clearly recognized his name. "Mr. Williams, I'll put you through right away." Within seconds, Jonathan's voice came through the phone. "Marcus, what's going on? Is everything all right?" Marcus glanced across the waiting room at Patricia, who was still loudly berating Sophia while families around her watched in uncomfortable silence. "Jonathan, I'm at Children's Memorial Hospital right now, and I need to tell you something about your wife's behavior that you're going to find very disturbing." "Patricia's at the hospital with Emma today for her pre-surgical consultation," Jonathan said, his voice taking on a note of concern. "What kind of behavior are you talking about?" Marcus took a deep breath. "In the past 30 minutes, I've watched your wife verbally abuse hospital staff, make discriminatory comments about families receiving charitable care, and specifically demand that charity cases be segregated from families like yours who have private insurance." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. "Marcus," Jonathan said finally, "are you certain about this? That doesn't sound like Patricia." "Jonathan, she called my wheelchair pathetic and told me to move because my presence was inconveniencing her while she was complaining to the receptionist." Another silence, longer this time. "You're in a wheelchair," Jonathan said quietly. "Oh God, Marcus, I had no idea. When did that happen?" 23 years ago, industrial accident, but that's not the point right now. The point is that your wife is actively trying to have vulnerable families removed from hospital facilities because she doesn't think they belong in the same space as her. Marcus could hear Jonathan's breathing change on the other end of the line. "There's something else you need to know," Marcus continued. "One of the families she's targeting, the Martinez family, their 8-year-old son is scheduled for heart surgery in 3 days. Surgery that costs $450,000. "Okay," Jonathan said, clearly not understanding the significance. "Surgery that's being funded entirely by my foundation," Marcus said quietly. "I've been paying for David Martinez's medical care for 18 months, Jonathan. Your wife just demanded that this family be removed from the hospital because they're charity cases, not knowing that I'm the charity." The sound that came through the phone was something between a gasp and a groan. "Marcus, I am so sorry. I had no idea Patricia was I don't even know what to say. Jonathan, I'm going to handle this situation, but I wanted you to know what happened before you heard about it from other sources." "What are you going to do?" Marcus looked at Linda Martinez, who was now crying quietly while trying to fill out paperwork with shaking hands. He looked at the other families in the waiting room, all of whom were now clearly uncomfortable and self-conscious about their presence. "I'm going to reveal my identity and make it clear exactly who has been funding the care that your wife is trying to interfere with. Marcus, please, let me talk to her first. Let me try to—" "Jonathan, I appreciate the offer, but this has gone beyond a conversation between spouses. Your wife's actions have put a child's medical care at risk. That's where I draw the line." Marcus ended the call and immediately dialed Dr. Sarah Kim. "Marcus?" Dr. Kim answered on the first ring. "What's happening over there?" "Sarah, I need you to come to the cardiac surgery waiting room immediately. Bring Administrator Chen and Dr. Martinez's surgical team. It's time to clear up some confusion about the Martinez family's status here." "What kind of confusion?" Marcus looked at Patricia, who had finally finished her tirade against Sophia and was now sitting in a chair near the reception desk, radiating satisfaction at having resolved her complaints. The kind of confusion that happens when someone tries to interfere with my foundation's work, Marcus said. I'll explain everything when you get here. 15 minutes later, Dr. Sarah Kim entered the waiting room, followed by Dr. Chen, Administrator Margaret Foster, and Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, David Martinez's lead surgeon. The group's arrival immediately changed the atmosphere of the space, as other families recognized the significance of having so many senior staff members present. Patricia noticed the group's arrival as well, and Marcus could see her straightening in her chair, apparently assuming they were there to address her complaints. "Dr. Chen," Patricia called out as the medical team approached, "I'm so glad you're here. I've been trying to resolve some issues about wait times and the mixing of different patient populations in your facilities." Dr. Chen looked confused. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I'm not sure what you mean about patient populations. We treat all children according to their medical needs, regardless of their insurance status." Patricia's expression suggested she viewed this as exactly the problem she wanted to address. "That's what I wanted to discuss," she said, standing up and approaching the group. "I think there should be separate facilities for families who are receiving charity care. It's uncomfortable for paying patients to be mixed in with people who can't afford proper medical treatment." The silence that followed Patricia's statement was deafening. Dr. Kim looked horrified. Administrator Foster's face showed barely contained anger, and Dr. Rodriguez looked like she was reconsidering her career choices. It was Marcus who broke the silence. "Dr. Kim," he said, wheeling his chair into the center of the group, "I think this would be an appropriate time to clarify the funding situation for David Martinez's surgery." Patricia looked at Marcus with obvious irritation. "Excuse me, but this is a private conversation between medical staff and actual patients' families." Dr. Kim looked at Marcus with understanding dawning in her eyes. "Mr. Williams, are you sure you want to do this publicly?" "I'm certain," Marcus replied. "I think everyone here needs to understand exactly how charitable care works at this hospital." He turned to face Patricia directly. "Mrs. Hawthorne, you've spent the morning complaining about charity cases and demanding that families like the Martinez family be separated from families like yours." Patricia's expression showed confusion mixed with continued irritation. "I don't see what this has to do with you." Marcus pulled out his phone and opened an app that connected him directly to his foundation's financial systems. With a few touches, he brought up David Martinez's account, showing a detailed record of payments totaling over $300,000 to date. "This has everything to do with me," Marcus said quietly, "because I'm the charity you've been complaining about." He held up his phone so everyone could see the screen. "The Marcus Williams Foundation for Pediatric Excellence has been funding David Martinez's care for 18 months. The surgical procedure scheduled for this week, the one you think his family doesn't deserve to receive in the same facility as your daughter, is being paid for entirely by my foundation." Patricia stared at the phone screen, then at Marcus, then back at the screen as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "That's not possible," she said finally. "I'm what?" Marcus asked gently. "A man in a wheelchair, someone whose presence you find pathetic and inconvenient." The color drained from Patricia's face as she began to understand the magnitude of what was happening. Dr. Kim stepped forward. "Mrs. Hawthorne, Mr. Marcus Williams is the founder and CEO of Adaptive Medical Solutions and one of the largest private donors to pediatric medical programs in the country. His foundation has funded over 300 surgeries for children whose families couldn't afford care." Administrator Foster added, "Mr. Williams, we had no idea you were here today. If we had known, you would have treated me exactly the same way you treat every family in this waiting room," Marcus said firmly, "because that's what good hospitals do. They provide excellent care regardless of a patient's financial situation or their family's social status." He turned back to Patricia, who was now sitting down heavily in her chair. "Mrs. Hawthorne, David Martinez is 8 years old. He was born with a heart defect that will kill him without surgical intervention. His mother, Linda, works as a nurse's aide, earning just enough to keep food on the table, but nowhere near enough to afford specialized cardiac surgery." Marcus gestured toward Linda, who was watching the conversation with growing amazement. "For the past 18 months, I've been covering every aspect of David's care. Not because I expect gratitude or recognition, but because no child should die from a treatable condition due to their family's financial circumstances. Patricia was staring at Linda now, as if seeing her for the first time. You've spent this morning trying to have David and his mother removed from this hospital because you don't think they belong here, Marcus continued. You've complained to administrators about charity cases mixing with paying patients. You've created a hostile environment that made Linda afraid her son might lose his chance at life-saving surgery. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Hawthorne, David Martinez is one of the most remarkable young patients I've ever treated. His courage and optimism throughout this process have inspired our entire surgical team. The idea that anyone would question his family's right to be here is deeply disturbing. Patricia buried her face in her hands. Oh God, what have I done? Marcus looked at Linda, who was crying again, but these were tears of relief and gratitude rather than fear. Linda, Marcus said, I want to assure you that David's surgery will proceed as scheduled. There will be no administrative review, no questions about your family's right to be here, and no concerns about your son's continued care. Linda stood up from her chair and walked toward Marcus, her steps uncertain but determined. Mr. Williams, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. You've been our angel for all these months, and we didn't even know your name. She knelt down beside his wheelchair, putting herself at his eye level. Thank you for saving my son's life. Thank you for giving us hope when we had none. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes for the first time since he had entered the hospital that morning. Linda, it's been my honor to help David. He's going to have a wonderful life. As Linda stood up, Patricia finally found her voice again. Mr. Williams, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I owe you the most profound apology. What I said about your wheelchair, what I said about families like the Martinez family, there's no excuse for any of it. Marcus studied Patricia's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus fear of consequences. Mrs. Hawthorne, do you understand why your words were so harmful? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Because I made assumptions about people based on appearances and circumstances. Because I treated human beings as less worthy of respect and dignity. And, Marcus prompted gently, and because I tried to use my privilege to hurt families who were already facing unimaginable challenges. Marcus nodded slowly. Patricia, apologies are meaningful, but change requires action. What are you going to do differently going forward? Before Patricia could answer, Dr. Kim's phone rang. She answered it, spoke briefly, then turned to the group with a smile. That was the surgical team coordinator. David Martinez's pre-surgical appointments have been moved up. The family can meet with the anesthesiology team this afternoon instead of waiting until tomorrow. Linda's face lit up with joy and relief. Marcus looked at Patricia, who was watching Linda's happiness with something that might have been wonder. Mrs. Hawthorne, Marcus said, would you like to see what hope looks like when it's given to someone who desperately needs it? Patricia nodded, not trusting her voice to speak. As the medical team began preparing to escort Linda to her son's appointments, Marcus realized that the morning's painful encounter had become something none of them had expected. It had become a lesson in the power of dignity, the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances, and the possibility that even the cruelest behavior could be transformed into an opportunity for growth. But the most important transformation was yet to come. 3 hours later, the cardiac surgery waiting room had transformed into something none of them could have imagined when the day began. Linda Martinez sat beside Marcus, showing him pictures of David from her phone, images of a bright-eyed 8-year-old boy who loved soccer and dreamed of becoming a doctor someday. The fear and anxiety that had marked her face that morning had been replaced by hope and genuine joy as she described the afternoon's successful pre-surgical appointments. Doctor. Rodriguez says David's heart is responding better to the preliminary treatments than they expected, Linda was saying, her voice filled with wonder. She thinks the surgery will be even more successful than originally planned. Marcus smiled as he looked at the photos. He looks like a fighter, I can see the determination in his eyes. He gets that from his father, Linda said softly. David's dad died in a car accident when David was 3, but he always told David that being brave wasn't about not being scared. It was about doing the right thing, even when you were scared. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Stories like David's were exactly why he had built his foundation, why he had dedicated his wealth to ensuring that children didn't suffer for circumstances beyond their control. Linda, Marcus said gently, I want you to know that David's care doesn't end with this surgery. The foundation will cover all of his follow-up treatments, any additional procedures he might need, and his ongoing cardiac care through adulthood. Linda's eyes filled with tears again. Mr. Williams, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for us. You don't need to thank me, Marcus replied. You need to focus on being the amazing mother you already are, and on helping David grow up to change the world. Across the waiting room, Patricia Hawthorne sat with Dr. Sarah Kim, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Over the past 3 hours, Patricia had undergone a transformation that was both visible and profound. After the initial shock of learning Marcus's identity had worn off, Patricia had asked Dr. Kim to explain exactly how the foundation worked, how many children it had helped, and what the process looked like for families who received assistance. What she had learned had shattered her understanding of charitable care and the families who relied on it. Dr. Kim, Patricia was saying, I had no idea that most of the families receiving foundation assistance are working families. I assumed that charity meant... I don't know what I assumed. Dr. Kim nodded patiently. Mrs. Hawthorne, that's a common misconception. Most of our foundation families have at least one parent working full-time, often in essential jobs like healthcare, education, or emergency services. They're not asking for handouts. They're facing medical costs that would bankrupt any middle-class family. Patricia looked toward Linda, who was still talking with Marcus about David's future. Linda works as a nurse's aide, doesn't she? She does. Linda works nights at a nursing home, taking care of elderly patients who need specialized care. She's been at the same job for 6 years, never missed a shift, even when David was having his worst cardiac episodes. Patricia was quiet for a moment. So she's been taking care of other people's families while worrying about her own son's survival. That's exactly right. Patricia stood up abruptly. Dr. Kim, I need to do something. Can you help me? 10 minutes later, Patricia approached Marcus and Linda with Dr. Kim beside her. Mr. Williams, Patricia said, her voice uncertain but determined, I've been talking with Dr. Kim about your foundation, and I want to make a contribution. Marcus studied Patricia's face carefully. That's very generous, but please, Patricia interrupted. I need to do this, not as an apology, although I owe you both the most profound apology. I need to do this because I want to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. She pulled out her checkbook and wrote something quickly, then handed the check to Marcus. The amount was for $50,000. Patricia, Marcus said, looking at the check with surprise. This is incredibly generous, but you don't need to... Yes, I do, Patricia said firmly. Mr. Williams, today you showed me what real strength looks like. Linda, you've shown me what real courage looks like. I want to learn to be the kind of person who builds others up instead of tearing them down. Linda looked at Patricia with an expression of amazement. Mrs. Hawthorne, that's so kind of you. Patricia sat down in the chair across from them. Linda, can I ask you something? How do you stay so positive when you're facing something this scary? Linda considered the question. I think about David's future. I think about all the things he's going to do with the life that Mr. Williams is helping us save. I think about how this experience is teaching both of us that there are still good people in the world who care about strangers. She looked at Marcus, then at Patricia. And I try to remember that everyone is fighting some kind of battle. Even people who seem to have everything figured out might be struggling with things I can't see. Patricia's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. You're a better person than I am. No, Linda said firmly. I'm just a person who's been blessed with help when I needed it most. That doesn't make me better. It makes me grateful. Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. The morning had begun with cruelty and discrimination, but it was ending with understanding and connection. "Patricia," Marcus said, "can I ask you something? What changed for you today? What made you see things differently?" Patricia thought for a long moment. "When you revealed who you were, my first feeling was panic. I was terrified about what you might do to punish me for my behavior." She looked directly at Linda. "But then I watched how you reacted to learning that Mr. Williams had been helping your family. The joy on your face, the gratitude, the way you talked about your son's future. It made me realize what I had almost destroyed with my selfishness." Patricia's voice grew stronger. "I realize that I've been living my life focused on what I deserve, what I'm entitled to, what other people should do for me. But you've been living your life focused on what you can give to your son, what you can do to help other people, how you can make the world better even while facing your own crisis." She turned to Marcus. "And you've been using your success to save children's lives, while I've been using my privilege to make other people feel small." Marcus felt something powerful stirring in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced years ago when he had decided to build something meaningful from his own trauma. "Patricia," he said gently, "the fact that you can see the difference means you can choose to be different going forward." Dr. Kim stepped forward with a clipboard. "Mr. Williams, if I may interrupt, I have some paperwork for the foundation, and I think Patricia might be interested in seeing how we identify families who need assistance." Over the next hour, Dr. Kim walked Patricia through the foundation's process for helping families. She showed her case files, with identifying information removed, of children who had received life-saving treatments, photos of kids who were now healthy and thriving thanks to the foundation's intervention, and letters from families expressing their gratitude. "This is incredible," Patricia said, reviewing a folder full of thank you notes from families. "You're not just saving individual children, you're saving entire families from financial ruin and medical despair." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly the goal. Medical crises shouldn't destroy families financially on top of the emotional trauma they're already facing." Patricia looked up from the folder. "Mr. Williams, would you consider letting me volunteer with the foundation? Not just contributing money, but actually helping with the work." Marcus was genuinely surprised by the request. "What kind of work were you thinking about?" "I don't know yet," Patricia admitted. "But I want to learn how to be useful instead of just entitled. I want to understand what families like Linda's actually need, so I can help provide it." Linda had been listening to this conversation with growing interest. "Mrs. Hawthorne, if you really want to understand what families need, you could volunteer at the Ronald McDonald House. That's where David and I have been staying during his treatments." Patricia's face lit up. "Would they let me do that? Would families be comfortable with someone like me helping them?" "People can tell when someone genuinely wants to help," Linda said with a smile, "and everyone deserves a chance to become better than they were." As the afternoon drew to a close, Marcus found himself reflecting on the unexpected turns the day had taken. He had come to the hospital for a routine check on his foundation's work, expecting to observe quietly and leave unnoticed. Instead, he had endured a painful reminder of the discrimination that still followed him everywhere. But he had also witnessed something extraordinary, genuine transformation in another human being. His phone buzzed with a text message from Jonathan Hawthorne. "Marcus, Patricia called me and told me everything that happened today. I can't adequately express how sorry I am for her behavior, but I also want you to know how grateful I am that you chose to handle the situation with such grace. Patricia hasn't been this engaged with helping others since before her father died last year. Thank you for giving her a chance to become the person she wants to be." Marcus showed the message to Patricia, who read it with visible emotion. "My father spent his life volunteering at homeless shelters and food banks," she said softly. "After he died, I think I lost sight of the values he taught me. Today reminded me who I want to be." As the three of them prepared to leave the hospital, Linda turned to Marcus one final time. "Mr. Williams, David is going to want to meet the man who saved his life. Would you be willing to visit him after his surgery?" Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. "Linda, it would be my absolute honor." She turned to Patricia. "Mrs. Hawthorne, you're welcome to visit David too. I think he would enjoy meeting someone who's learning to see the world the way he does, with hope and kindness." Patricia nodded, not trusting her voice to speak without breaking. As they walked toward the hospital's exit together, Marcus in his wheelchair, Linda carrying her folder of pre-surgical paperwork, and Patricia carrying information about volunteering opportunities, Marcus reflected on the day's lessons. He had been reminded that discrimination and cruelty still existed in the world, sometimes in the most unexpected places. But he had also been reminded that people were capable of profound change when given the opportunity and the motivation to grow. Most importantly, he had been reminded that the work he was doing, using his success to transform other people's tragedies into triumphs, was the most meaningful way he could spend his life. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Click the next one, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in kindness. 3 days later, David Martinez's surgery was a complete success. The 8-year-old boy who had been born with a complex heart defect now had a healthy heart and a bright future ahead of him. Marcus was there when David woke up from surgery, along with Linda and, to everyone's surprise, Patricia Hawthorne. Patricia had spent the previous 3 days volunteering at the Ronald McDonald House, learning firsthand about the challenges facing families dealing with pediatric medical crises. She had helped serve meals, played games with siblings of sick children, and listened to stories that had completely transformed her understanding of strength, courage, and grace. When David opened his eyes and saw the group gathered around his bed, his first words were, "Mom, are these the angels you told me about?" Linda smiled through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. These are definitely angels." As David recovered over the following weeks, he and Patricia developed an unexpected friendship. She would visit him regularly, bringing books and games and listening to his dreams about becoming a doctor so he could help other kids with heart problems. Patricia's volunteer work expanded beyond the Ronald McDonald House to include fundraising for the Marcus Williams Foundation. Within 6 months, her efforts had raised over $200,000 for pediatric medical care. But the most significant change was in Patricia herself. The woman who had once demanded segregation of charity patients from paying customers had become one of the most passionate advocates for healthcare equity in the city. A year later, when David Martinez scored the winning goal in his first soccer game since his surgery, 3 people were cheering louder than anyone else in the stands. Marcus Williams, the man whose foundation had saved David's life. Linda Martinez, the mother whose love and strength had carried her family through their darkest time. And Patricia Hawthorne, the woman who had learned that true wealth wasn't measured by what you could afford to buy, but by what you chose to give away. Sometimes the most extraordinary transformations began with the most ordinary encounters. Sometimes the people who appeared to have all the power were actually the ones who needed to learn the most about strength. And sometimes the greatest gift you could give someone wasn't money or medical care. It was the chance to discover the person they were truly meant to be. In the end, Marcus had accomplished something more valuable than saving one child's life. He had proven that courage, compassion, and the willingness to see beyond surface appearances could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. The marble floors of Children's Memorial Hospital continued to echo with the footsteps and wheel tracks of families facing their greatest challenges. But now, among those families, there moved people who understood that every person in that space, regardless of their mobility, their bank account, or their insurance status, deserved to be treated with dignity, respect, and the recognition that their lives had immeasurable value. And in the cardiac surgery waiting room, a small plaque had been installed near the windows where Marcus had sat on that transformative morning. It read simply, "In memory of every person who has ever been underestimated, may we see beyond appearances to the extraordinary strength that lies within."